Hello and welcome to Football Social Daily. We are back to being the only daily Premier League podcast with new shows 7 days of the week, and there is football coming thick and fast over the next few weeks as well. We will keep you abreast of the latest news, the latest action, and the latest views from the English top flight. I'm Jim Salveson. That's Niall McCaughan.
Hey.
That's Steffen Armstrong.
Now then.
And today, as normal on a Friday, we're going to be doing the AQA podcast. We're going to be doing it slightly differently. The AQA podcast will fall into the second half of today's show. The first half, we're going to look at the small action of the Premier League games that are coming up later this Friday. After having a devastatingly long break of Thursday with no football, there is no breaks from now on. It is relentless. We've got Tottenham versus Manchester United to look at today. We're also going to be looking at Norwich City versus Spurs, which is exactly where we're going to start. Sorry, Norwich City versus Southampton, which is where we're going to start. First question, I guess, is should this game even be going ahead? It was less than 7 days ago that Norwich played Spurs in a friendly. One of the players from the Norwich City team then was tested positive for coronavirus. There doesn't seem to be any isolation required for any of the players for either team other than the person who tested positive. So are the Premier League taking a big risk by even considering putting this game on in the first place, Niall?
Yeah, probably. But I mean, I think what it is it feels like to me that this has kind of been so rigorously planned by the Premier League, having certain breaks in play where they're going to disinfect the balls and they've got like 50 footballs around behind the advertising hoardings to make sure that, not too many people are touching it at once. And, everyone sat in the stands, whether they're medical staff or journalists, have to wear masks. It's all been so rigorously planned. So for like 3 days before the restart, a whole team to have to quarantine in Spurs and obviously Norwich as well. So 2 whole teams having to quarantine would have been an absolute disaster. And to be honest, I don't think the project restart would have been able to go ahead if that was the case. If you've got 2 whole teams that have to quarantine for 2 weeks or 7 days, that completely blows the schedule out of the water in terms of being able to complete it properly. Because if you think about it, the games are so stacked and close together that having 2 weeks break between one team playing and another team playing, if you're talking about the interest of fairness, it's almost unfair because you suppose you're saying that Norwich get an extra 2 weeks of being fit, presuming that only one player's got COVID-19 and all of the rest of them have to quarantine. They're all still fit and healthy, and they can all still technically train, I suppose. So, you've got the argument there that one team might have a slight advantage over the other. So I think the Premier League, I don't want to accuse them of anything here, but I certainly feel that it seemed a little bit like, oh, we should probably sweep this one under the carpet a little bit, because if things go belly up now, the whole thing's going to fall away, which would be an absolute disaster. I mean, if you talk about the government guidelines, there's no way this game should be going ahead. But the Premier League guidelines and the ones that they're adhering to in regard to coronavirus are slightly different. So the whole point that Spurs didn't self-isolate for that period of time was because they say that they weren't in close enough contact to the player at Norwich who had COVID-19. And, the rules around close contact mean within 2 meters of someone for 15 minutes. Now, coronavirus doesn't go...
Well, that says more about Spurs defending, doesn't it? That they're not getting close enough to other players to possibly warrant a coronavirus being contracted.
Very, very possibly. But, I mean, to me, it just feels a little bit strange that, you've got this whole notion of making sure that everyone's safe, and yet you've got a player who's come into contact with at least 20 other people in a period of 90 minutes or whatever it might be. And... the game has not been cooled off when we saw originally back in March, games being cooled off before we reached this big peak that we've had since then. So I just think it's a little bit strange that it's worked out that way. Although the Premier League have done sort of protocol themselves, like players need to go to the games in their own cars, get changed in the back of their own cars. So that was for practice matches. Obviously the same.
That sounds like Sunday League football, that.
I know, it does sound like Sunday League football. And, it did feel a bit like that, Steffen, watching the games as well on Wednesday evening. I was disappointed. I spoke about this on yesterday's podcast. I don't know why. It just didn't. I think the hype was too much.
Who scheduled Sheffield United against Villa as the first game back after 100 days? Oh, let's go with Sheffield United Villa. That's when you play Tottenham Man United. Jobs are good.
Yeah, I see what you mean, but I think it's all about as well, like when the season was suspended in March, I guess to keep the season as it would have been, you need to play what would have been the next game, which I guess was Villa versus Sheffield United. So I guess that's what they're trying to do. But the gap's been so long that it doesn't really matter. I still think that you could have put Man United Spurs in that slot, like you say.
I think it's difficult to judge when it's not your team as well. I watched both games, and Sheffield United versus Villa, I was kind of very distracted from. A little bit more interested in the Manchester City game, but it's when my team's on telly this weekend that I think it's really going to be a fair judgment. But I'm going to push coronavirus to the side because God knows we've talked enough about coronavirus over the last couple of months and talk about some actual football instead, because we're seeing
Jim,
this phase. Yeah, we have to. We're seeing this phase where teams are coming out of lockdown now, and the Premier League is resuming. There's been a lot of talk about who can take advantage of that, like things like the extra subs being an advantage to teams with maybe bigger squads. So in terms of Norwich City, I look at them and go, actually, have they got a better chance of staying up with this 2-month period where they've been able to assess the games they've got left, maybe take that step back, maybe regroup? I would have maybe said Norwich City were down before the whole coronavirus break. Now, Steffen, do they have a slim chance of staying up?
I think they've got a better chance of staying up. They've had a few months to really focus on what we've got to try and achieve. I think without a break, they wouldn't have managed it. But if they approached it as a fresh season start, and Teemu Pukki kind of has the same start as he did in August, they've got a chance, haven't they? Surely.
Still got a lot of defenders.
The games are coming in thick and fast as well. So if they get on a bit of a roll, might be a bit of a great escape. So I think there's hope for them. If they lose tonight, then I think we'll change our tune.
Yeah, when they did have the hardest possible start to the season back in August, where they had the first game of the season away at Anfield, and they ended up losing the game 4-1, I think. So, it's almost like the most difficult start you could hope for a team coming up from the Championship that are tipped to probably go down again. And you come up against the Liverpool side who had just won the Champions League and finished second by a point the season before. It was always going to be a tough start. There was a period that Steffen mentions where Teemu Pukki, the goals kind of dried up. I think between maybe November and January, sort of the goals weren't quite there for Teemu Pukki. You have to forgive me if I'm wrong, Norwich fans, but you do feel that he's going to have to score pretty much all of their goals if they're going to have any chance. And the reason I don't think that they have got a slight chance, better chance, like Steffen says, but a reason I think that they probably won't do it, they still got the same players, and those players weren't good enough to keep them above water in terms of the relegation zone up to this point. So I can't see how, the same players are going to turn things around drastically. They did have a truckload of injuries, Jim, like you say, and they do have some players that are kind of on the road to recovery, but I still just think it'll be a step too far.
Still very thin defensively. They've still got a lot of injuries in that area. The players you talk about, so I'm thinking Teemu Pukki, maybe Campbell, Aarons. I guess for them, the next 9 games, it's about their next contract now. Not at Norwich necessarily, but it's them putting themselves in the shop window. So potentially we could see performances out of those players as they look to stay in the Premier League, even if Norwich City don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And, Pukki's 30, I think, now. So if he wants a big move, it's going to be, off the back of this season, because he's kind of been not a nobody, but he's played for some big clubs. I think he played for some of the bigger clubs in did he play for Sevilla at one point? I'm not sure. He's played for some reasonably sized football clubs, but it's never really happened for him. So, Norwich plucked him out of, I think, Norway or Denmark on a free transfer.
He was up at Celtic at one point, was he not?
He was. I think you're right. Yeah, but I don't.
He's reached the heights, so he's the twilight of his career now.
Scottish football.
I think to answer your question, Jim, if you're a West Ham fan and you're sitting 6 points above Norwich, are you worried?
Yeah, massively worried. I'm really concerned. I think the first few games back are going to be massively telling for West Ham. And certainly we're not going to talk about West Ham today, so I'll be brief. But when Moyes came in, there was questions about whether he was the right man to take the job, and those questions are still there. So I think what we do in those first few games back is going to be massively telling. But I think anyone from kind of 14th down probably is going to be concerned about potential relegation, and the less teams that can get out of it, so the worse Norwich does, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
You'd think if Southampton win today, they'll be safe because they have got a bit of a cushion.
Well, I think Southampton probably believe that as well because they've just offered Ralph Hasenhüttl a new contract, or might have signed a new
Yeah,
contract, in
he
fact, by
has. Yeah.
now. So he signed that deal. So, I mean, they obviously believe they've got the right man for the job, and it would be rare to offer a new contract to a manager who you thought was going to get you relegated. So potentially they're looking to stay in the Premier League over the next few seasons. And if they do, a lot of that credit's got to go to Danny Ings this season. Here's a big question for you. Jamie Vardy currently has 19 goals. He's in line for the Golden Boot. Danny Ings is only 4 goals behind him. Is it feasible that Danny Ings, whilst playing for Southampton, a relegation-threatened club, could get the Golden Boot?
No.
Okay.
No, definitely
Moving
not.
swiftly on.
No, but if you look at his stats as well, I think he's played 30 games for Southampton and scored 14 goals, 15 goals. So he's 1 in 2. He's not going to win the Golden Boot. No chance.
I wouldn't be too worried about the fact Hasenhüttl signed a new contract either, Jim. I know they feel that they've got the right man for the job, and I think from their perspective, the supporters certainly feel that he's a better fit for them than any of the sort of previous 2 or 3 managers that they've had. And you've got to think, since Maurizio Pochettino left St Mary's, it's been a bit of a, coming off the rails for Southampton, really. They were finishing in the sort of the top 10 regularly a couple of seasons in a row. And then obviously I think they brought in Pellegrino, and Ronald Koeman was there before that, and I think he did all right. But since then they've had Claude Puel, who was a disaster. Mark Hughes was an absolute car crash. I mean, you talk about offering a new contract to someone who might get you relegated. They offered a 3-year deal to Mark Hughes, and he signed it, and then he got sacked like less than a year later. And now you look at Ralph Hasenhüttl, who has guided the side to a 9-0 defeat this season. So it's not all been, sunshine and happiness for Southampton this season. I don't think Danny Ings is good enough to win the Golden Boot. I simply don't. I just think, it's going to be, like I said, I just think the other strikers in the league are a step above Danny Ings. This is the first real season where we've seen him be this prolific. And it took until sort of September, October for him to get into his stride. And then again, since Christmas, it's not quite been the same for him. But I do feel that, if he can continue the form on, he might even be able to get a move to another club who, are looking to move up. I mean, if you think about Sheffield United and the strikers they've got, Sharp, McGoldrick, Lys Mousset, Sheffield United done really well this season, but none of those are real sharpshooters. And I think, someone like Danny Ings, who's proven that he can score in the Premier League, and, he's been really good for Southampton this year, might even fit better into a side like that, where he might be able to sort of be the poacher in the side and fire another club to a potential top 10 finish.
Would that be a massive step up for him, though? Sheffield United, yeah, they've done well this season, but there's a lot of teams that do well coming into the Premier League, have one great season, and then kind of fade away. I know
Well,
you hate Southampton,
right.
Niall,
Let me tell you this. Their captain, Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, was stripped of the captaincy by Ralph Hasenhüttl yesterday because he said, quote, "I don't want to be playing for a team that's fighting relegation every season." So Ralph Hasenhüttl said, "Well, you're not the captain anymore," and he stripped him of the captain's armband. He's also basically put out a plea there and saying, well, it's amongst interest from lots of clubs. He's put himself in the shop window and said that he wants to play Champions League football. And he doesn't want to be fighting relegation every season. Now, as I mentioned before, Southampton fans, when they came up to the Premier League, I can't remember how many years ago now, enjoyed the first 2 or 3 seasons, a real good glut of form, finishing in the top 10. Now they're back to the Southampton from the 90s, hovering above the relegation zone, possibly looking over their shoulder every season, wondering when they're going to go down, because that's what Southampton always were. And it felt like that they had broken that mold, and now they're kind of slipping back into it again. I think they're an overrated football club.
Is this Portsmouth TV we're on here? What is it?
No, I don't think we'd be mentioning them lot down the road if it was Portsmouth TV, Steffen.
Let's get a quick prediction before we move on to Spurs versus Manchester United. What we're seeing tonight: Norwich versus Southampton. Niall, you can go first. Predictably, predicts Norwich to win.
I got to go Norwich to win 2-1. I think it'll be 1-1 or 2-1 either way. I don't think it'll be too much of a landslide.
Steffen?
I'm going for a score draw there, 2-2.
2-2. All right. Well, let's move on to Spurs versus Manchester United, which I think you've got to say is the best game that has been on this kind of little comeback for the Premier League. Certainly the most exciting. 2 teams that are used to dealing with viruses as well. One had Manchester United's Jose Mourinho. The other has got Jose Mourinho, which is the ultimate footballing virus. I mean, there
Paul
was a
Pogba,
time
don't forget him.
Oh yeah. He was. Who was it that described him as a virus?
Jose.
Well, yeah. So this is the Mourinho derby. And there was a time when Jose Mourinho, going back to an old club, you would chalk it off as a win for his new team because he'd be that determined, he'd have that much presence, you'd know he was going to get a result. Now, the fear's gone, the magic's gone. It doesn't really seem to be the same Jose, and this seems like quite an open game, doesn't it?
Is the game being played in London or Manchester?
It's in
London.
Tottenham.
London. I think it's unfortunate we're not going to have any fans there to kind of will them on a little bit. This break came at the perfect time for Tottenham. So they'll be absolutely chuffed that they're playing Man United now with a full lineup. Mourinho's already said that Kane's going to start the game, although he's not kicked a ball in 6 months competitively. If I was Tottenham, I'd be chuffed with the whole circumstance of this game. And I think it'll be feisty. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think you're right,
Son back as well.
Yeah, Mourinho confirmed yesterday that Son, Kane and Sissoko will all start. Bergwijn's back from injury. Lo Celso isn't going to play for Tottenham because he's got a bit of a knock, or at least he's going to face a late fitness test. And Dele Alli's actually banned as well for mocking coronavirus in a Snapchat video. So the FA banned him for a game and fined him 50 grand for taking the mickey out of coronavirus, which obviously isn't a laughing matter, really. Dele Alli says he was betrayed by a friend. It was on a private Snapchat account, and someone sold him out to a newspaper for 50 grand or whatever it might be. So yeah, Dele Alli is not going to play. But as Steffen says, break came at a perfect time for Spurs. They were sixth without a win in all competitions. Players injured all over the place. Son was out for the season with a broken arm. Kane had hamstring surgery. Bergwijn was injured. And it just felt like it was just Lucas Moura on his own up front and creating chances. Yeah. Tanguy and Ndombele was playing poorly. The chances weren't really kind of being created for Tottenham, and it felt like a real drag. So now to have everyone back fully fit, certainly a benefit for Mourinho, who, if anyone, does have an advantage because he's been breaking lockdown, training his players in a park every other day during the quarantine period when he shouldn't have been.
He's got a good tan for it, though.
Jose. It's that Portuguese skin.
I think Man United, though, they had a bit of form, I think, before lockdown, and they had a bit of a Fernandes effect going on. So they would have loved this game 3 months ago. So that's why I think it's wide open. That's why I think it's an intriguing game.
Unbeaten in 11 going into lockdown for Manchester United, and you kind of got to disregard form a little bit, but they were seemingly turning it around. I mean, it's great for Spurs, and they have got these key players back, but for United as well, there are key players back. They've got Marcus Rashford back fit as well. They've got Paul Pogba back fit. I mean, that just shows how long the lockdown's been, that Paul Pogba is actually able to play football again. We are going to see, likely for the very first time, Fernandes and Paul Pogba in midfield together. On paper, that looks devastating, Steffen.
It does, but I think that's what worries Man United fans as well, because on paper it looks too good to be true. Man United fans are thinking, bloody hell, if you look at our front starting 11 now, it actually looks like top of the table material, this. But you've never seen Pogba play with Fernandes, and everybody knows what shadow comes with Paul Pogba and what he can do to Man United team, which is score a winner and change the game. But he can also make the Man United team quite slow and immobile, I'd say. So he just seems to slow the whole thing down a little bit. Paul Pogba.
But surely you can't have those two players playing in the same midfield and it not work, can you?
Yeah, well, sure, you must be able to. And this is what Solskjaer's test will be as a manager. I mean, everyone said that you kind of, Solskjaer's had these excuses where Paul Pogba's been unfit and he's not had the players he's wanted and he's not had enough transfer windows. Well, I thought Joe McGrath said this quite nicely on yesterday's podcast. He's had 3 months. Everyone's back to full fitness. He's had ample time to think about this game against Tottenham. He would have predicted that Tottenham would have been back to full fitness. So what would his excuse be if Manchester United lose? Because we've seen them before just kind of be a bit toothless, as Steffen says, be a little bit slow, allow other teams to kind of hit them on the counter. We saw that against Newcastle earlier this season where, Manchester United had all of the ball and then Newcastle just go and hit them with a not a sucker punch, but a counter attack, and they go and win the game 1-0. So just like breaking teams down was a difficulty for Manchester United. So yeah, I mean, Solskjaer, that would be a test of his credentials. I mean, people were saying, how can Fernandes and Pogba play in the same midfield? Well, there's more than one formation, and they're two quality players. So if you want really the best out of your Manchester United squad, you're going to have to find a way to play them, and whether that's Fernandes further forward and Paul Pogba line in a more deeper role, pulling a few more strings, and then Fernandes playing the playmaker or the number 10 or whatever it might be. That possibly could work. Playing them side by side and then having someone like Matic or McTominay in behind in a midfield three, that might work. But the thing is, it's up to Solskjaer to test that out on the training ground. So it'd be fascinating to see whether Pogba will start or not. I think Fernandes will. I'm not sure whether Pogba will. I reckon we might see him come on from the bench as a possible replacement for Fernandes if Fernandes is feeling fatigued, or even just as a little bit of an experiment in the second half if things are going United's way. But I think it would be fascinating to see whether both players start alongside each other, or at least in the same team.
And Pogba still, sorry, not Pogba, Solskjaer still has to prove himself as well as Manchester United manager. He has turned it around. He has had this big run of 11 games unbeaten, but there are still a lot of people that are doubting him and whether he has the capabilities to be Manchester United manager. He has between now and the end of the season. I'm pretty sure he'll be there the season afterwards as well, but then beyond that, who knows? He needs to prove himself. He needs to prove he is.
Champions League. It's all about that Champions League thing, because that affects next season so much in terms of who they could possibly bring in. And Man United are probably one of the only teams who can actually spend big this summer. So if it goes well and they get Champions League and then they spend big in the summer, that's the Man United that you want to see next season. So it's massive.
Yeah, and they're obviously in fifth at the moment, aren't they? So if they can cling on to fifth, they could even get Champions League through that, depending on what happens with City's court case with UEFA. So, it's almost like Jose's gunning for that spot with Spurs as well. Fifth is kind of the new fourth, at least for this season.
That'd be dramatic, wouldn't it, if City get kicked out of the Champions League or that holds and Manchester United take their place? That'd be drama in the city of Manchester. Right, we're going to leave it there. Oh, let's get a prediction for the Spurs versus Manchester United game then. Who are we seeing winning this one? Niall?
I don't know why, but I just feel that I always seem to say this when Jose goes back to an old club. I can see a Spurs player going down injured, like Kane getting injured straight away. But I still think that Spurs, I don't know why. I fancy Spurs at home. I'm going to go 2-1 Tottenham.
Steffen?
I fancy Man United. I think they're going to be electric. At least that's what I'm hoping. So 3-1 Man United.
Ooh, it's got 0-0 written all over for me. There's too much excitement, too much pressure on the game. It's going to finish 0-0. Right, we're going to take a little break. We're going to come back in a minute and we're going to do AQAs. We're going to answer some of your questions that have come in via our social media channels. We'll do that very shortly. But this weekend and tonight, of course, you can follow the latest action on your team with the Premier League being back. You can get all the latest match reports, and after the final whistle, you can get the latest news and whatnot via the Sports Social Alexa skill. To find that, just say Alexa open Sports Social for your news and match reports there, or you can head over to our brand new website, that is sports-social.co.uk. You can find all the details there of how to access us via Alexa or via Google Home or via your smart speaker. You can also listen to all those reports and match updates and match previews there as well. That's sports-social.co.uk. We'll be back with Football Social Daily in one moment. Welcome back to Football Social Daily. This is Any Questions Answered, our AQA section of the podcast. We normally do this on a Friday. We're going to keep it going for the time being in the second half of Friday's podcast, answering your questions so you can get them into us via our social media channels at the Sports Social on Twitter, Sports Social Official on Instagram, or you can search us on Facebook. Just search Sports Social. You can find all those on our website, sports-social.co.uk. That's me saying Sports Social a lot there. So let's kick straight on with the very first question. This has come in from Seb via Facebook, and his question is, given what happened on Wednesday night and the success, inverted commas, of VAR, is it time to ditch all technology and just go back to refs and linesmen making all calls in Premier League football? I can see you shaking your head, Steffen, so you're obviously not in agreement with Seb.
I'm half in agreement with him. I think keep goal line technology and ditch VAR.
Yes, I agree, 100%. Steffen.
Goal line technology is good. Like, I think it's messed up once the other night in how many years?
They say more than 9,000 matches, Steffen, that it's never failed, and then the one time that we get the Premier League back, it messes up on the first day.
Yeah, no, goal line technology is brilliant. Although during World Cups, I do support Germany, so Frank Lampard, I think goal line technology is great. It's quick, it's efficient, it works. VAR I detest. So let's get rid of VAR.
Yeah, I'm with you, Steffen, to be fair. I think we're too far along with the goal line technology, and it's been too consistent and too reliable to get rid of it now. I think it's been in place since 2017. And as I said a moment ago, more than 9,000 matches in multiple competitions, from the Champions League to, the French league, to every league you can think of, has got goal line technology, and Hawkeye have implemented it really well. So for it to fail for the first game back, I think there's something slightly suspicious going on there. I mean, it just feels like maybe a human error. And I know it's a technological system, but considering there's not been a game for 3 months and it's the first game back in the Premier League, it does feel that maybe something along those lines might have happened, whether something hasn't been installed properly or someone's forgotten to press a certain button or whatever it might be. So keep goal line technology. I totally agree with Steffen there, but I also agree with him about VAR. I think if you're going to get rid of technology, you've got to give it a fair bash. And I think 7 years is too long. For instance, goal line technology, we're too far in to get rid. With VAR now, I think we would have had one season had the season ended by now. Looks like we will have one whole season. Doesn't look like we're going to change VAR for next season. I think give it a couple of seasons. And if the consensus is the clubs vote again, and after 2 seasons, you can get rid. And it doesn't cause as much of a fuss as it does if you get rid of it after 10 years or 15 years. You know what I mean? So I think that's the case, really. I think keep technology as it is for the time being and let the clubs vote if they don't like it in a couple of seasons.
Technology needs to be black and white, and VAR just causes controversy. So it doesn't help the situation. Just take it out.
I think you're right, and you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We know that Hawkeye works, although I thought it was a little chip in the ball. I didn't realise it was cameras. I thought it was like a little microchip or something that made it vibrate on his watch when it crossed the line. So I was surprised by that it is cameras. But I think what it highlighted for me was one of the big problems with VAR and maybe technology in general, although we do know that goal line technology works, in that we are stopping the referees making those decisions. So when we saw the Sheffield United Villa game, we knew watching on telly the ball across the line. The players knew the ball across the line. Michael Oliver, in the middle of that pitch, knew the ball across the line. But because he didn't get that notification on his watch, he didn't feel comfortable making that call. And that's kind of what we're doing with VAR. We're deferring that decision elsewhere. So when something happens on the pitch, VAR is supposed to correct clear and obvious errors. That's the mandate it has, right? So when Michael Oliver sees something on the pitch, or any referee for that matter, they don't need to make that decision anymore. They can let that go to VAR, and it's half being maybe scared, but half also having the option not to take responsibility, to be able to pass that responsibility on elsewhere. And I think that's really dangerous.
I get that, and I understand what you're saying. And yesterday Alex Boardman on the podcast said 2 years ago Michael Oliver would have refereed that situation differently because there wouldn't have been VAR, and perhaps maybe he wouldn't have been waiting for VAR to step in had the technology failed. But if we're kind of talking about someone resting on their laurels or taking it for granted that the technology was going to work, I don't blame Michael Oliver in this situation. It's worked in over 9,000 situations. So for it to fail once, you aren't expecting it to fail. I mean, you should always have that very slight percentage of expectation that something might go wrong. But the referee in the middle, Michael Oliver's used this system for hundreds of matches, hundreds since 2013, Champions League games, international games. It's never failed. So I don't blame him for kind of perhaps taking it for granted a little bit and thinking that it was going to work.
From not making that decision.
Is it not the assistant though, Steffen? Should it not have been? Should the linesman not have been in the correct position? Because if you're Michael Oliver in the middle of the pitch, you might have an idea, but in terms of angles, surely the assistant referee would have been in a better position.
Yeah.
Right, let's move on to the next question as Niall takes a drink of water just while he swirls that around his mouth. What have you got the next one, Niall?
Yeah, the next question comes from Tom on Instagram, and it is, what is the best move for Coutinho? So we've spoken about Coutinho a couple of times on the podcast before. Of course, he's been at Bayern Munich on a 2-year loan from Barcelona, Steffen. It didn't really work for him at Barca since he arrived there from Liverpool for what was above 100 million quid. It looks like Barca and Bayern both aren't really too asked about keeping him on. So a move to the Premier League might be in the offing. Where do you see him ending up? Or do you think it might just be a 6-month spell in the wilderness for him?
No, I think he can do a job at a lot of clubs. I don't think he needs to go to a club that are particularly gunning to win anything. I think he'd be happy playing Champions League football. Why not see him at a team like Tottenham? I think he'd work well there.
Could they afford him?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
With wages and stuff like that. They're quite tight, aren't they? Really, and they've taken out like £150 million or £175 million loan because of the effects of coronavirus. So with Coutinho on reasonably big wages, do you reckon Spurs could afford him?
Well, if you look at any of the other clubs in the Premier League where he could realistically go to, he's not going to go back to Liverpool. Man United, I think, have already got their midfield future sorted with Fernandes and maybe Pogba. Unless if something happens where Pogba goes and Coutinho comes in. But for some reason, I just don't fancy him as a fit at Man United. Then you can only really say, realistically, Chelsea. Chelsea have just spent big on Timo Werner, so I don't know if they'd be able to dish out another... How much would it be for Coutinho? Maybe 70 million or so?
I think so.
I don't know. He's maybe going to struggle to get to a team in the Premier League who can afford him. But if it is, then it's got to be one of a Tottenham Chelsea type team. Unless if he goes elsewhere, goes back to Spain, or I don't know.
I think you're right. I think Chelsea have kind of done their business or are doing their business with the players that have either signed or been heavily linked in the last few weeks. I think Coutinho has a bit of an unfortunate situation. And there's a few players like this where the bracket he falls into in terms of transfer fee and wages probably don't quite match up to what you're going to get in terms of guaranteed return because of the last couple of seasons he's had where he hasn't maybe lived up to the billing. And what was it, 150 or 140 that he signed for Barcelona for?
It was above 100, I think 120 something in the end, but it was a lot.
It was a load of money and he's on a load of wages. So that does limit his options of where he's going to go. And clubs are going to be reluctant to fork that out in order to bring him in because he doesn't guarantee you that level of performance. I've heard Arsenal linked, but if he goes to Arsenal, they only want a loan deal and they want Barcelona to pay the wages, which doesn't seem like a particularly realistic ask. And they probably wanted to take David Luiz as well. I mean, they're probably trying to get rid of everything in one go. So I can't see that happening. I think honest answer would be, I don't think he'll come to the Premier League, although he said he quite fancies it. I think he'll either go to Inter Milan or PSG because Barcelona will want to get, if they're not going to get a transfer fee, they'll either want Martinez or Neymar coming the other way. So I think he'll end up in one of those clubs.
Yeah, he's going to be maybe China. It's a good point. I mean, he's going to end up at a big club, and although not maybe a title challenging club in the Premier League, I think Steffen's right. I don't think we'll see him drop down to play for the likes of, someone like Sevilla or someone like that. I do think he would be at, one of the top European clubs. I mean, it just feels like it's got PSG written all over it, hasn't it? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. A club like PSG who've got money to burn. Financial fair play doesn't seem to apply to PSG. I won't go into why I think that is, but they seem to pay a lot of money to a lot of players, and Coutinho seems to fit into that bracket of star player who needs a bit of a leg up, like what happened to Di Maria when he left Manchester United, went to PSG after having a bit of a poor time of it at United by his own admission, and then he's seemed to have done all right for Paris. So I think Coutinho is almost destined to end up at PSG at least.
He can go there and be the star as well, particularly if Neymar does go the other way. If Neymar goes back to Barcelona, he could just be the main man at PSG, and I think that would suit him.
It's a good point because Barcelona's wage structure, I don't know how accurate it was, but I saw some numbers of their wage structure the other day. I mean, they're paying Messi something ridiculous like £1.2 million a month or something. And then Griezmann's on €925,000 a month or something. So it's just like absurd amounts of money. And, this is kind of all the way down their playing roster. They've got players on that kind of wages. So I think that Coutinho could be a make weight if Neymar was to go back to Barca, and I think Neymar has wanted to go back to Spain for a while.
Right, final question, Steffen. What are we talking?
Okay, so we're back in the Premier League here. Will Burnley ever change the way they play, and should they? That's from Mike on Instagram.
Although that's the wrong question because we realised we answered that on a previous podcast.
Okay, what one have we got?
The correct question, I'll give it to you, and you can repeat it if you like. Is from.
Oh no, I've got it. Who has the most likable Premier League team of all time? From Liam on Instagram.
Oh, the most likable Premier League team of all time.
It's a very subjective question, isn't it?
It's extremely subjective because I think actually in recent times, and I'm talking really recent times, and I think you've said this on the podcast in the course of this season, Steffen, the current Chelsea team has probably been the most likable Chelsea
Yeah.
team that there's been in a decade, really, maybe even more. Because it was almost like Roman Abramovich came in the early part of the century and spent a load of money, and they bought Crespo and they bought Mourinho and Drogba, and they bought all these players and, Joe Cole and all of this stuff. And they kind of became immediately successful. But since they've had a transfer ban, Frank Lampard's come in. No one's got a bad word to say about Frank Lampard. He's a nice player, and obviously extremely good. Well, not extremely good manager, but an extremely well-respected figure at Chelsea because of what he did at the club. And he's brought through these young players. So I think those young talents at Chelsea seem to be kind of swaying the scales in favour of them being the most likeable team, at least Chelsea team, for absolutely years. So maybe they're, possibly a consideration. But for me, I do get a lot of people when they find out that I'm a Portsmouth fan saying, "Oh, remember that Portsmouth team of 2008,
You can't nominate your
2009?"
own team.
Why not?
Because
West Ham have never had a likeable team, Jim.
Canyo.
They've never had a likeable team. That was a likeable player.
West Ham's everyone's second club. They should have. But I stayed away from nominating my own team.
They're like the
because
West Indies in cricket, everyone's second favourite team.
I think I know the answer to the question. I know what the correct answer is. I know this is subjective, but I know the correct answer.
Go on, then.
It's Leicester's Premier League winning team. Nobody had anything bad to say about that team. I mean, that was just graft. It was hard work. At the time, I was living in Nottingham, and everybody in Nottingham was a Leicester fan because they just captured the imagination, and it kind of broke the realm of football as well. It was just a good news story. So Leicester Premier League.
Yeah, that's not far off. What about, so my kind of rules for this would be, it can't be a team that's dominated for years. And it can't be a team that's had a huge financial cash injection, because they're the things that make you hate clubs. But I kind of go against that a little bit, because I think one of my favourite Premier League teams of all time was Arsenal's Invincibles, which
hang on. You've just set out those criteria, and then you've gone for a team that didn't lose a game the entire season.
That's been a little rubbish after that. They've been rubbish since. So it's all right.
You're not allowed to dominate, but can't lose a game the entire season, and that's okay. All right, cool.
Let me quantify this a little bit. The reason I liked them, I think, was because you look at the team and you look at the players, and they had Bergkamp, Henry, Roberto Perez, Vieira, Lundberg. They had supremely talented players, and they didn't always play brilliantly, but they worked as a team for the entire thing. And I like people that hard work. I like teams that hard work. And they kind of had that thing that Atletico Madrid do now, where they were so solid. And you'd have players like Lundberg and Perez. They'd work back all the time. So it wasn't just about playing scintillating football going forward. And they did play scintillating football going forward, because how could you not with Bergkamp and Henry up front? But they also had that kind of team ethic. So they had the luxury, but they also had the graft. And I think that made them a little bit special. And they did something really special in being the Invincibles as well.
I like that Arsenal are the original Atletico Madrid. That's a nice sentiment. That do you know what though, Jim? I think that team I loved more in hindsight. At the time, I hated that Arsenal team. Yeah, but I appreciate it now, because that just doesn't happen, does it?
Pioneers of diving.
Yeah, at that stage, either they were in the Championship, or was it Division 1 then? I can't remember now. But so West Ham weren't in the Premier League, so we didn't come up against the Invincibles, which I think if we had, it would have clouded my opinion a little bit. But because we're in a different league, I didn't mind them as much.
We did, and Robert Pires dived for a penalty to win 1-0 at Fratton Park. Won't ever forget it. Pioneers of diving, Lundberg and Pires. Never forget that either.
Right, and on that note, we'll wrap up the Football Social Daily there. Thank you very much for listening. These podcasts are now 7 days a week. We'll be looking forward and looking back to all the Premier League games. So if you can't keep up pace with them on the telly, and I can't, I think my wife's limited me to one game a day, so I'm allowed one little treat of football, and that's it. So I have to use the podcast to keep up to date. So you can too. Click subscribe now and you'll never miss an episode. And for next Friday's show, get your questions in via our social media at the Sports Social on Twitter, Sports Social Official on Instagram, and find us on Facebook. Just search Sports Social there. Steffen, Niall, thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Cheers, Jim.
And I'll see you next time on Football Social Daily.